It's Sunday morning with Mark Sainsbury.
Welcome back to Radio Live this Sunday morning, and of course, one of our Sunday morning regulars, Dr. Harold Hillman. Now, he is a leadership coach. He's an author, celebrity speaker. Of course, he wrote a book. It was, I think it was Whitcoul's Business Book of the Year, The Imposter Syndrome. And I think a lot of people in business seem to adopt that. But what we're talking about this morning is, because Harold has spent so much time both here and in the US, is a bit of a comparison just in terms of the way we do business, our business practices in here, and in the good old US of A. Good morning, Harold.
Good morning, Mark. It's great to talk to you again.
What's the first difference that would stick out in your mind?
Well, look, there are many. I've had the great fortune of working in different cultures, and as you mentioned, certainly the opportunity to live in the U.S. and in New Zealand. There are many upsides to business environment in New Zealand. I think, in general, relationships are stronger here in the workplace, partly associated with there being a lot more moderate and small businesses. But there is something also very real about that 2 degrees of separation in New Zealand, where people really do know each other directly and indirectly. And so I think that's a real plus. There's something refreshing about the head-down, bum-up mentality in New Zealand, what I consider to be a real strong work ethic.
Harold, one of the things that you hear here, or criticism of business in New Zealand, is this sort of business, it's ruled by committee. We're always having to have committees and meetings and consultations before we can ever make a decision.
That's right.
Is that a fair criticism?
It is a fair criticism. I think that there's an overemphasis of consultation in New Zealand, partly driven by legislative requirements. But there's also that sense of, again, because people are more tightly connected to each other, a sense of wanting to be overly careful. I think that we've actually gone to the other end of the continuum, where it's almost like quick and decisive leadership is a bad thing as opposed to a good thing. And I think New Zealand can find its way back to a better place on that continuum between quick and decisive leadership and this whole thing around open consultation. I think we can be better at quicker, more effective decision making.
Harold, what things then do we do better here than in the States?
Well, I think, again, there's something. I love the can-do attitude in New Zealand business. I learned early on in my years in New Zealand the number 8 wire mentality. And so by the end of the day, we will get it done. So there just tends to be what I would consider to be an ethic that is just stronger around being able to accomplish what you need to be able to do. And again, I think there's something really good about that relationship component that often is not present in U.S. companies. And so when New Zealand companies are going through downsizings and restructures, it's my impression, Mark, that that New Zealand businesses do that with a greater degree of compassion and focus on the well-being of their employees.
So they're kinder employers in this country than in the States? Well,
yes. It feels, particularly during restructures and downsizings, it feels less cold and mechanistic. In the U.S., because in big organizations, people really are numbers. It feels impersonal, whereas in New Zealand, it's hard to look at an individual as a number because in one way or the other, you have sort of a connection to them either through direct or indirect relationships. And so that's something that I think translates into more of a humanity around decisions that affect people's lives in New Zealand.
Harold, one of the things you specialise in is dealing with change, and that change is a constant in business. But what about when downturns hit, when businesses have to adjust to the financial crises, or there's a downturn in the business environment? Do American businesses operate differently from Kiwi ones in that situation?
Yeah, I think in those situations, particularly in a downturn, you really do need to exhibit more directive, what some people call autocratic leadership. And that is, you don't have a lot of time or opportunity for overly consultative processes where everybody gets to weigh in and determine how to move. And I think that in the face of economic crunch or downtime, you do see things moving a lot quicker in the States. Again, back to that whole issue of how much consultation do we need to do before we move, and so I think that in the U.S. Around driving greater efficiencies and productivity and those types of things, it just tends to happen a little swifter.
Harold, look, we are running out of time. There's one thing I want to touch on with you is how do we compare to the Americans in terms of viewing, valuing, or recognizing success? Because you look at American companies, they seem to revel in success. They celebrate success.
Yeah, we really do. There is something real about this tall poppy thing, Mark, and I wouldn't have been able to appreciate that until I came to New Zealand and really experienced it. There's something that holds New Zealanders back from being able to talk about success, being able to celebrate success, not only at an organizational level, but also at a very personal level. People are real reluctant to tell you what they're good at because sometimes it's perceived as self-promoting or being over the top. And I think New Zealand really needs to crack that code because there are good things happening here, and because there tends to be a bit of humility associated with that, a lot of the world doesn't know it. A lot of New Zealand companies don't even know what's going on in terms of best practice.
Well, you're the best person to get out there and just get them into dealing with that. Dr. Harold Hillman, thanks so much again for joining us. And look, you can check out Harold on his website, www.sigmoidcurve, sigmoidcurve.com. And that is Dr. Harold Hillman. Thanks so much for your time this morning here on Radio Live.
Thank you, Mark.